And you'll be able to see that it's live and you see the timer as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. I'm very excited, gracious, grateful, and humbled that Miss Christina Gomez is here to join us today. I mean, she's made dare I say, substantial splashes and waves in a positive sense in the UFO community. And when I reached out to her a little while ago, as we were saying just before I started recording, I was very excited to hear back from her. So, Christina, without further ado, how are you doing today?
I'm doing so well. I'm so excited for this. And it's honestly amazing to talk to someone else, a part of the Gen Z community. And, I feel like there are more people getting involved, but there's just simply not enough yet, at least not publicly. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Right. And I couldn't agree more. And I truly thank you for that, for saying that, because I think our generation has a particular perspective that is a little more, dare I say, mind opening, that maybe previous generations would call fringe, if that makes sense.
That's correct. I completely agree with that. And of course, we still have people in our generation and generations that come after us who still don't believe in the phenomenon. More and more people are becoming open-minded, and the younger generations that are to come are just being more exposed to all of these different possibilities that older generations just simply didn't have, such as TV shows that cover these kinds of topics, books, movies. I mean, everything that you can imagine in today's world, we're just being exposed to it every single day. I mean, a good example of this, which is like probably one of the most famous movies of all time, might have to be Harry Potter or even The Hobbit, right? And you're bringing in magic, you're bringing in all of these witches and wizards and all these different possibilities. And that's kind of, just one aspect to any kind of phenomena that we cover, anything kind of also under the fringe. But then you have some other amazing movies that have come out into the 80s into the present day, such as Alien, Predator, and even newer ones that we're also jumping into. So I feel like with this digital age, also with being, again, just exposed to television every single day, it's more difficult to have a closed mind on these topics that we cover.
Right, and I couldn't agree more with you. Now, speaking of which, considering that there's been so much within the entertainment industry that, again, we can go down the path of dissemination of knowledge through science fiction movies and what have you. But I really forgive me if I'm jumping a bit too quickly out of the gate. But where does it, for you personally, Christina, where does it sort of stop in the sense of someone comes to you and, let's say, for the sake of this question, for this example, you fully believe them in what they said they've experienced, but is there a metaphorical ceiling for you, and I ask this in purely good faith, where it's kind of like, okay, that's a bit much, or has it gone to the point where your experience in this field has just made you consider anything is truly possible?
I believe that anything is truly possible. I'm still very, very new to this topic when it comes to the UFO phenomena or even the fringe. And I take anecdotal accounts as anecdotal. I do keep an open mind and I will never judge those that tell me their stories or stories that I hear, but they're merely just anecdotal accounts. And for a lot of these people, it's very difficult to receive evidence from these accounts for the most part. So all I can really do is just have a listening ear and then
Right.
and then look at my prior knowledge from the research that I've done and try to make up my own conclusions. The biggest thing is that I keep my shows and channel free of any bias or narratives or my opinions, and I
Right.
really try to I prefer to be a neutral conduit for the information.
Right. That's okay. I see exactly what you're saying. Taking that neutral stance and not allowing the check boxes of confirmation bias, at least consciously, to sort of step in and sort of sway you in one direction or the other. Right. So, speaking of that, when actually, if I may ask, have you had any personal experiences, whether paranormal or UAP? If you'd be gracious enough to speak on any of it.
I
I've had
have.
some woo woo ones myself, but
I've
yeah.
I've had my own experiences and not ones that I even though I've been doing this for a while and I'm on camera almost every single day talking to other people about this, I don't usually bring up my own experiences and I'll briefly go over them today, but for myself, usually when people have these weird encounters, they're so very personal. And no matter how hard you try to explain it, in some respects, it just doesn't make sense. And if you weren't there, you can't just get that same kind of feeling, that same kind of grasping of understanding what the heck is going on.
Right.
I had one case, I guess maybe a few years ago. It was kind of recent. It's kind of a funny story, actually. I had just entered university. I had just got my own apartment and I didn't have a vacuum yet. I was, because like as soon as you enter, you have very little money. And I'm like, a vacuum cleaner is $70. I can't afford one. So I sat next to this girl who had been in college for a few years and she had a vacuum. And I'm like, so, hey there, friend. Can I just borrow your vacuum literally just for a few hours? Is that okay? And she was like, yeah, no problem. So I drive over to her house and there was already something kind of off. I didn't really know this girl that well, but I knew her enough to simply ask for a favor and being like, hey, that's okay.
Sure.
And it's kind of like that kind of tingly feeling that you get when you enter somewhere that just doesn't feel right or it feels perfect. And it's kind of like, I guess you would consider the sixth sense. And mine doesn't work that well, but in this case it was like on high alert. So but I brushed it off because I'm a more scientifically minded. So I was like, what are gut feelings? Nah, I don't really
Right.
believe in that kind of stuff. So I mean, it's kind of a funny experience, which I guess could loosely classify as paranormal. So I received this vacuum. It's like it's not a good vacuum. It's pretty bad. I
Okay.
take it home and I just feel like when I'm driving, there's just something in the car with me. And I'm like, it's no big deal. I'm just paranoid. It's dark at night. It's fine. I get home and I leave the vacuum in a corner. I'm thinking, I'm just going to vacuum a little bit later. Let me just kind of rest and be mentally prepared to clean the house. And as soon as I leave the vacuum in the corner close to the bathroom, I used to have this one like huge candle in the bathroom, like just like this, probably maybe a pound, like it weighed about a pound and made out of glass. And the lights weren't on, the fan wasn't on in the bathroom, and the candle just falls off the counter.
Huh.
And I'm like, that's weird. There's not a simple explanation for that. But I didn't think much of it.
It
And I'm
never
like,
fell
okay,
before. Generally, it's not.
never felt. And again, this candle is very heavy. You would need a
Okay.
good amount of force to push it.
I only
It's
ask, and I only ask in good faith because in some
of
cases
course.
people preface it with, oh, maybe if you have a weak or unstable flooring, if you will, that can cause something to shake. But it was none of that. I take it.
No, and the foundation that I have in this apartment, it's concrete. So like there's nothing that can move. I don't live in an area that has a lot of earthquakes or anything.
Mm,
So there wasn't an explanation for it. I didn't think much of it. So I'm like, okay, I'll put it back. I leave and I go back into the living room and it falls again. And I'm like, hmm.
yeah.
I'm not and at this moment I wasn't in the topic yet. I didn't know too much about the paranormal, the fringe, the supernatural, the UFO phenomenon. I wasn't there yet mentally. So I was like, okay, this is weird. Okay, I watched once on television. If I put salt, maybe it'll get rid of this evil spirit. So I'm like sprinkling salt over this candle.
Right.
And I'm thinking about it now and it's really funny. And I'm like, that's so dumb.
In the
But at
moment,
that
though, you never know, right?
well, right, because I was experiencing something that I knew nothing about. So
Mm,
I'm looking at my television knowledge to hopefully save myself from this entity that I didn't even know if it was benevolent or malevolent yet.
right.
So I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of getting out of hand. So I thought, okay, let me try something else because now the house just feels different. My tiny dorm apartment, the energy just doesn't feel right.
Mm,
And again, I had only been living here for maybe like a month. So I was still kind of like getting used to everything. And so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna play some kind of like I'm gonna type on YouTube and see what comes up. How to get rid of entity. And then I see these kinds of like chants and mantras and kind of like binaural beats. And I'm
sorry,
like,
can I ask how long ago this was? I only asked because YouTube has done some waves of
yeah, this
censorship
was
pertaining
about
to.
3 years ago now.
Okay, so YouTube wasn't nicking as much as they are. Okay, okay. Just wanted to give
This
some
is about
context
3
for the
years ago. Yeah.
audience. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was like, "Okay, Google, YouTube, help me out. What do I need to do? Where's WikiHow?" Okay? And, I start playing it, and then what ends up happening, and it's like the most bizarre part, is that I heard this kind of screeching, screaming sound coming out of the audio, and that when I mean the audio, I mean it's kind of like it came out of it wasn't part of the track, if that makes sense.
Whoa, yeah.
And I'm like, "What's going on? I'm not ready for this. I live on my own. I don't know who to call. Ghostbusters, there's nobody here to help
Right.
me." And, after that moment, it passed, and I returned that vacuum as soon as I got it. I called that girl and I said, "Hey, let me return your vacuum. I know it's 9 p.m. I don't want it." She's like, "No, just give it to me in the morning. It's fine." And I'm like, "No, I can't. I take it back.
Wow.
Take it back." She's like, "No, no, no, it's fine." So I ended up putting it outside. I have, like, this little storage unit, a really, really small one, and I put it in there, and I'm like, "You're gonna stay in that closet. Do not come out until I return you."
I know
And
this
then
might be funny, but did you say that verbally or in your head?
in my head, yeah,
Okay.
it was in my mind. And then I ended up returning it the next day, and I never spoke to that girl again. I was like, "Here you go."
Wow.
And that's kind of like my comical paranormal encounter. I've never seen anything else. Like I've never seen any apparitions or things like that, even though I've begun to research them pretty extensively. But I what I really wanna keep in mind is that when this encounter happened, I had no prior knowledge. I simply did not know how to handle the situation or exactly what I was experiencing. If you have background knowledge, you're able to rationalize a little bit differently. You're able to understand the situation and act accordingly. But if you're going in blind, it's
Yeah.
a different story altogether. And even though I had, I've been interested in these types of topics, but there's a difference between being interested in it and really diving deep and researching a topic. There's a really, really big difference. So at that moment, I'm like, there's so much more I need to learn. That's a story that I rarely tell, but it makes me laugh every single time now when I think back on it. At that moment, it wasn't funny.
Well, first off, let me just say thank you so much for even being willing to share that because trying to put myself in your shoes. I've been in similar scenarios, and especially when you're alone in a given environment or something like this that doesn't feel right. And I recall you saying you're more of a science-based person, so one could maybe argue those are the bioresonant frequencies that you're absorbing and emitting in all of this. But by chance, did you ever happen to do any research, maybe not pertaining to that event, but to the concept of whether we call it ghosts, paranormal entities? These have to do with potential magnetizations of their, dare I say, astral memory or something like this. I know that might be a little woo woo for some. I know in science, in surface level academia, it's now called plasma. But have you traveled along that route of research in any shape or form?
Not extensively yet when it comes to that, but there's countless theories on things such as attachments, ghosts, apparitions, poltergeists. There's
Right.
kinds of different ideas why they're in this realm, why they can be seen, why some of them live in loops while others don't, while some can interact with people here now versus some can't. I've spoken to several paranormal investigators and ghost hunters, and even though they've been studying this for decades, they also simply do not have a definite answer on what's going on. They have their own theories, they have their own experiences, they even have certain evidence of EVPs, recording audio of these ghosts, but from the ones that I've spoken to so far, no one really has an answer, and I guess we won't know until we pass
Mhm.
over,
And
until we cross over.
just to clarify for the audience, EVP, that is the device used to, if I'm not mistaken, device used to sort of listen for audio. They sit in a quiet room and they try and communicate with the being.
Right, it's an electronic voice phenomena, and that's you're able to get you can get any kind of recorder, preferably not one on your phone, but any kind of handheld recorder,
Right.
and, if you see just, like, as an example, on Ghost Adventures, for example, they use this quite often. They ask a question, they give it a few seconds, and they play it back. And it
Yeah.
seems that, and I've asked this question and to these paranormal investigators, and I'm like, how does this work? How are you able to record audio that you cannot hear with your own ears, but that this recorder can capture? And again, there's different reasonings for that. You have a more scientific explanation, and you have a more kind of a belief system as well.
Do
But
you
for the
sorry,
most
do you
part,
happen to recall what the scientific explanation was?
I can pull it up for you because I do have it and I can read it for you exactly. But for the most part, what the reasoning is that these types of recorders are just simply able to catch frequencies that the human ear can't hear, in the same sense that dogs, right, they can hear frequencies that humans cannot hear.
Right.
So that's one possibility. But kind of the more science explanation for it is,
They're
let
outside of the spectrum of our perceivable senses, um, frequentially, possibly.
Well, I guess it's not just that, but it's kind of the frequency down to 40 hertz. So we simply cannot hear 40 hertz with our ears.
Right. Right.
So
Would these be? I don't. Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot in this regard. If it's just if memory serves you well, was there any mention of extremely low frequencies, ultra low frequencies, very low frequencies, any of those kind of terms when speaking to these investigators?
not to my knowledge.
Okay. Okay.
No. But
I
but but it but it does get mentioned from time to time. As for the more scientific explanations, that there are two main theories that I kind of kept coming across,
sure.
and they were where an entity is able to vibrate the atoms and the filaments of the microphone directly, while the other has to do with the influence of electrical charges and electromagnetic radiation.
That wow. Okay, thank you so much. I truly appreciate you looking that up in real time. I usually don't do that with guests and what have you, but the reason I ask is because our community and our audience has been following those two proposals or hypotheses quite avidly as an avenue of exploration. So thank you. So that would be the most, at least scientifically, the most common answer that you get. Now,
Yes.
what about, if I may ask, on the spiritual side? What's the most common answer from the paranormal investigators that you're told?
When it comes to the spiritual aspect, it's not something that I've deeply looked into or
Sure.
have asked my people that I've interviewed, paranormal investigators. It's kind of more the scientific aspect, or the more of like what they've experienced, what they've recorded themselves, just because the spiritual aspect, while it may be just as important as the science aspect, you're depending a lot more on faith and
Yeah.
on belief. And for many, that just kind of differs from person to person. And in many respects, they simply can't relate to it or to have data to back up those claims. And again, with my show, with the people that I speak to, with the interviews that I conduct, it's all about being neutral, to not bring in my own bias, but to allow people to listen in and then do their own research after if they really found that topic fascinating. And when you have data, when you have information, it just makes it a little bit easier than following just belief. And coincidentally, my next episode of Mysteries with a History is about near death experiences and the afterlife with Jimmy Church of Fade to Black Radio. So I guess in that show, I'll be able to, I guess, look a little bit more into the spiritual aspect and on how they're able to interpret these situations.
Right. By chance, before we move on, are the terms portals, vortexes, anything like this brought up when, whether on the scientific or spiritual side? Any of those type of terms?
Oh, yes.
Wormholes, anything like this?
Yes, absolutely. Again and again, both in people that have had their own experiences, the spiritual aspect, and even the science aspect. Now more than ever, it seems that people are talking about these things. And let me tell you how fascinating that is. Literally, just yesterday, I had Jessica Jones, the cryptid huntress, and she talked about her portal experience where some of her team members actually entered a portal, and they were able to see that that the environment was completely different, and even claimed that it looked like a cube shaped when they had seen it with their FLIR equipment. And again, she was on shifting the paradigm with me yesterday. So it seems that it's a topic that no one can run away from. And if we look at even the science aspect of it, scientists are fascinated when it comes to vortexes, portals, and even black holes, as an example, thinking that what if these white holes exist? You enter one end and you come out another end, maybe in a different location, maybe a different dimension, maybe a
Right.
different time period. There's all of these theories, and no one knows for certain yet what's on the other side or even how they're created. So, a lot more research needs to be done, and I'm looking forward to the evidence that will be provided in the future for it.
Now, not to get too conspiratorial, if you will, but are you of the? No, I don't want to say belief, but I guess maybe the um, ideological. I don't even want to say subscription, but are you open to the idea that there may be certain academics that act as, dare I say, gatekeepers of particular silos of knowledge that have, for whatever reason, not for me to say for good or for bad, but because that we can argue that's relative and that's a whole other conversation. But do you think that there have been some gatekeepers that have, again, for better or worse, suppressed some of this knowledge, at least in modern human history, the last 50 to 80 years, give or take?
I guess that could be possible. I mean, these fringe topics can upset the apple cart, so to
Yeah,
speak. So, when it comes, I mean, as the saying goes, knowledge is power. If you remove the knowledge, you remove the power. So, it's possible, but I
right.
simply cannot definitively answer that question because I don't know.
Right, right. Again, not to press in this regard, and I say ask very respectfully. Have you had conversations with individuals, whether scientists, academics, even simply eyewitness civilians, that seem to allude to that possibly that there's a there, but somehow we can't penetrate that knowledge, so to speak. I ask because I will. Let me go ahead and push this a little bit. I have some friends in which claim that they are associated with certain professors that have implied that there are um, silos of knowledge or pockets of knowledge that are being hidden, particularly within aerospace contracting companies. Has this come across your line of research at all by chance?
No, not yet. I will, I'm sure,
Right, right.
but not yet. Again,
Okay.
I'm very new to the topic. I still have so much to learn and so much to research. Then I have a whole list of things that I need to look into.
Oh no, I didn't mean I don't mean in any way, shape, or form to like put you on the spot in that regard. There's so many things that I get asked I have no idea about either, to be fair. So, but speaking of which, though, you being in university, if I'm not mistaken, I love to get your perspective on what you feel, witness, sense in the university atmosphere, because I've had the privilege of interviewing so many people, ergo they've been a little bit more up there in age, and that's no disrespect to any of them, but very seldom do I get a chance to speak with someone who's in the Generation Z crowd. No pun intended and all that. Are you sort of again, forgive me for asking in this way, but are you sometimes ridiculed by some? Are you supported by some? What's at least the landscape, if I may ask, where you are?
Honestly, they just don't pay much attention to the fringe topics. They're very distracted, sadly, and very distracted by other stuff, especially things related to social media. So when I bring up the topic, it's kind of like, okay. And then they're back on their phones doing who knows what. And then you do have some that are very interested. And then you do have some that still believe that the UFO phenomenon is demonic. So you get a batch of everyone, but for the most part, they don't deny these topics.
Mm,
They're open minded to them, but they just don't really care about the science aspect, the historical aspect, the spiritual aspect. to it, but that's to be expected. So I feel like when we're having these conversations and we're directly creating it for our generation, it can make them a lot more interested to really think outside of the box, to think outside of their little rectangle of a cell phone, and to look up into the skies, or to look in dark corners even, and
Mm,
look for things that might be considered unexplained. And they take a lot of these things, a lot of these fringe topics as a given. And if you ask, do do you think there are aliens out there or visiting Earth? Most are like, yeah, why not? And they go
right.
back to TikTok dancing videos, or they're
Right.
creating those videos.
Got you. Got you. Okay. See that. Okay. This is. Thank you for bringing that up because I wanted to touch on that actually shortly. Um, do you and I don't mean to get personal here, but do you have, say, for example, because I know that I certainly do, groups of friends, if you will, or maybe even just one or two individuals that you can speak to in a more direct tone pertaining to this subject, whereas others you sort of need to, maybe you may not even want to bring it up to with them at all when you're hanging out with them. Does that make sense?
Sure. When it comes to my friends, no. I mean, I do have a creative team that helps me, and very techie people, and they're very open minded. But when it comes to more of my colleagues that I would consider friends, if I'm not asked about it, I don't really openly speak about it, because if they're not ready for that information, if they don't have that willing to learn, they're not ready to hear that information yet. But
Right.
I always give them the outlet of saying, hey, if you're interested, here is my content if you want to take a look at it, and give them that option. All we can do is give them options to anyone,
Mm.
regardless of the generation, regardless of how old they are. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Yep. And I um sometimes add to that by saying this may be a bit of a brutal example, but you can take the horse to water, you can't make it drink, and if you put a gun to its head, what's the point? You know, that whole example there pertaining to this whole concept of again the suppression of knowledge and people being open-minded compared to other ones and all of this. And speaking of which, is there, do you find the focus on things like dare I say TikTok and social media by people of our individuals of our generation. No, I'm not trying to say this in a critical sense, but do you find that uh, the distraction is dare I say deliberate so that people of our generation do not focus on topics like this and rather would just sift through TikTok instead? Do you find that to be dare I say a pressing issue of our generation?
I mean, we could be looking at that in 100 year span. Look at newspapers
Mm,
originally. Look at magazines as well. Yes, they cover historical accounts, the weather, and they talk about gossip about celebrities of that time period. Would that be considered a distraction? Where if you're sitting on a train or on a bus, or if you're walking down the street and your head is in a newspaper or a magazine or even a book, would that be classified as a distraction? It depends who you're asking. Also depends on what they're learning. We can look at TikTok, for example, and yes, there's a lot of terrible content on there. And I won't get into detail. But then you also have some pretty amazing content creators that are very educational and have huge followings as well. So you're always going to be getting the bad with the good, and
right.
it's really just up to each individual to decide on what they want to do with their time, and we can't force them. All we can do is lead them in the right direction.
And what again, I know you're obviously just one individual. Let me preface this by saying that even for speak on behalf of myself and respectfully yourself in saying that one can make a strong argument that one's opinion should not dictate the the masses or the direction. But since I have you here in your, if you'd be so humble enough to speak on this, what topic do you think our generation is missing that should be focused on more? I know, obviously, generally speaking, one could argue, well, everything, but if we were to hone in a little bit, right? Are there one or two or three topics per se that you think, especially being a university student yourself, that our generation is missing? And I guess maybe this speaks to the larger concept of there's a lot of political discourse about our universities teaching people what to think or how to think and all of that, if you will.
I think something important that I guess is lacking is how the government is now coming out and admitting UFOs are buzzing our airspace. I feel like that kind of conversation can only lead our species in a more positive evolution. And the video footage of the UFOs taken by pilots, this is huge.
Right.
And this is to push that our future, humanity's future, is in space. That is where we're going to end up eventually. And then we have Elon Musk still trying to push to get people to Mars in 2024. That's in 2 years. And if we didn't have these conversations about UFOs, about the military catching videos of these objects that simply cannot be explained, or the fact that maybe we're already being visited. I mean, with these types of questions, and even with so many new exoplanets have been discovered, I mean, could the universe be teeming with life? These are the questions we need to ask. And if we do not have curiosity for these questions, we're never going to evolve. And that leads to all of the technology that we have today, how far we've gotten today, where people have been able to travel across the globe and to inhabit it. If that curiosity wasn't there, we wouldn't be where we are today. And it's not good being stuck with our noses in our cell phones. We are missing out on looking up. There's a lot going on in the skies that simply cannot be explained.
Okay, now I really appreciate you saying that because particularly the part where you said we got to stop, looking down at our phones and all of this. And th- in your humble opinion, and I want to be clear for the audience when this comes out and gets released, that we're just exploring ideas. Nothing is solidified. Nothing is factual. There's been I think it goes without saying that there's been a recent surge in anxiety amongst people of our generation and all of this. Would you speaking to paranormal investigators, in addition to obviously again being a student yourself, would you attribute some of this anxiety? I know to each individual it's different and all of this, but would you attribute some of that general anxiety to, dare I say, energies, frequencies in the air that make people tense depending on the location, or simply to that of honestly schoolwork, or a little bit of both? I know maybe it's a little bit of a stretch of a question, but I figured why not?
Anxiety is because the state of the world. Fear becomes energy, I believe. And look at the whole time of the pandemic, and now we have the threat of a nuclear war.
Mm,
Yeah, that's going to lead to
yeah,
anxiety. And in some respects, people may believe that it's maybe even infectious, these types of feelings of energy. And then, all the mainstream media does is doom and gloom. So
right.
you have that, like, doom, doom, and then wars coming.
Right.
So yeah, if you're on social media, if you watch the news, um, yeah, it's gonna lead to anxiety. And honestly, I don't blame them. It's a very tense time that we live in. And then there's also a lot of other possibilities on why people are feeling such a huge state of anxiety. It's not something that I've researched personally,
Mm,
but just looking at the surface of it, the pandemic, the threat of nuclear war, the mainstream media. Yeah, it's a thing. And then even
right.
suicide's a big thing as well. So when it comes to anxiety and the heightened feeling of anxiety, it's understandable in the world that we're living in today, right now.
Right. And do you think also this speaks to, in your opinion, this whole concept of, again, like bringing up TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, this, one could argue that, again, scrolling through such vast amounts of information is a good thing. But at the same time, one can also argue, because our generation is arguably the first generation to metaphorically plant our feet in the ground, and having said we've grown up with these devices and all of this, maybe do you think it's possible we have not been um I guess you could say, honed in compartmentalizing that information. Because when one cannot say, okay, I'm going to put the phone down, I'm going to study, or I'm going to put the phone down, I'm going to relax and live in the moment or meditate or whatever it is, the anxiety starts to just affect all aspects of your life. And I say this because I've personally, been through this myself in the past and all of that. And do you think there's an issue, dare I say, with maybe too much information being thrown in our faces at once, especially given that we went from generations of none of that to all of a sudden, boom.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily information, but everyone's competing for egoic profiles. Like, I'm more popular than you. And
Mm,
this is something that companies are pushing. They can sell more with advertising and stuff when all their consumers are competing with each other. This is what I meant earlier by people in college being very distracted. It's all about how many likes did I get on my latest photo, how many views did I get on my latest TikTok? Do people like me? Can I get a marketing deal where someone's going to give me a product for free so that I can kind of push it and say how great I look? This is all shallow and time wasting. So and and honestly, a really big distraction. So more than us just getting a lot of information on our phones, I think it's more of feeding those egoic profiles or those masks.
would you say, in your opinion, feeding that, and I fully agree, by the way, would you say feeding that egoic profile never ends, so to speak? Because I imagine I liken that to sort of financial greed, if you will. When does it ever end, right? Sort of like a spiral. You get 100 likes, you want 200. It just keeps going. Do you
It
being
never ends. It never ends.
okay?
You're never satisfied. And it gets ugly. It gets really,
Mm,
really ugly. And people get depressed because of
yeah.
it. And that depression can lead to anxiety.
Mm,
And when they don't get enough likes and they don't get enough views, they think, oh, I'm not good enough. So we're living in a very high stress society right now with social media,
yeah.
and it can even lead to suicide as well with these high emotions that simply are difficult to cope with.
Mm,
And if you try to put your phone down, then you're thinking, okay, I just posted a picture. How many likes did I get? How many comments did I get? And
right.
suicide stats are way up than in previous years, and young people too, teenagers especially. So, when we're dealing with the paranormal, supernatural, the UFO phenomena, or even the fringe, we're looking outside that rectangle
Yeah.
of a box, that
Right.
proverbial box,
Right.
and think, it's not about how good I look. It's not about all the makeup I wear. It's about looking for things and trying to find the truth. And my mantra is to look away from those distractions, to keep my eyes on the skies, to have that sense of wonder, a sense of awe. There's so much more out there, and to dig deep into those mysteries. I think, in my opinion,
Mm.
I think that's what life is all about. It's feeding that curiosity, not feeding the ego.
Right. I couldn't agree more. Sort of like the joy is in the journey, so to speak.
Exactly. But at the same time, with the field that we're in, being podcasters, really putting our face out there, we still have to sometimes fall into line with social media. We still need to post. We still need to, post videos and pictures and things like that to make sure that our audience can see a different side to us, or to get them engaged, or to kind of remind them that we have these shows coming out. It's still important for us to be involved in social media, but it's the mentality that we hold that needs to rise above all of that. And we need to always keep it clean and healthy to stimulate our audience's imagination, to get them asking those age old questions. Who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going?
Right. So to speak, right, this speaks to a larger, I guess you could say, societal or cultural collective of like standardization, meaning like, okay, for example, I'll be totally honest, I'll give you an example on my end. I do my best every 48 to 72 hours to make sure I do an Instagram post for the show, right? For the sake of trying to keep up with those that are, with the algorithm, and not posting too much, but not posting too little and all of this. And so that is that what you're speaking to in that regard?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm getting at. We can't run away from it in the age that we're in. We just need to keep what we post clean and healthy and honest to ourselves. And but also to be non-addictive to this as well. Like
Right.
we can't let it control us, but instead to aid us, to help us, and to bring this information to more people.
Right. Now, please forgive me for always bringing it back to the university system and all of this, simply because I never went myself. But do you find, whether for better or worse, that this type of behavior, whether negative or positive, is harbored or nurtured on university campuses, if you will, for better
That's
or worse?
that's a great question. In the time that I've been in university, I can see people on their phone literally walking to class, like not even looking up. They don't
Mm.
trip, they don't fall, and I'm like, wow, that is a superpower in itself. That is amazing.
Right.
But it's also it's just not healthy. And you know, you have occasional freeze ups, and then that's pretty strange. But when I'm looking at the university as a whole, any university, it doesn't even
Yeah.
matter which one,
Right.
and taking a step back, people are not interacting the way that they used to with each other. Everyone's on their phone, everyone's isolated, and in the most case, um, everyone is an introvert now. We have a lot less extroverts, at least from what I've seen so far. Like taking a look back, thinking, "Oh no, I don't really like talking to people," or "No, I don't really want to interact with them because their shoes aren't nice." I don't know,
Sort
but
of like that whole mantra of, oh hey, let me go speak to those people, I've been seeing them for the past week at lunchtime, but that whole concept is fading or gone already, so to speak.
and that's not always the case, but from the most part, if we look at maybe how college looked 20 years ago to maybe how it looks today in 2022,
Right.
there's a big difference, and it's very difficult to begin to enter people's I don't want to say lives, but like if you want to hold a conversation, they need to make the conscious effort to put down their phone, put it on mute, and to want to talk to you about whatever. And you know, I did a great meme about that, about this on Twitter, about talking about UFOs at a dorm party and the strange looks I got. And you're like, I'm talking about sports or like the football game,
I think I saw
UFOs.
that tweet. Yeah.
And you know, I had a lot of fun making it. I was laughing while I was making it because it was so accurate to
Mm.
in instances that I have literally been a part of. I've entered a type of gathering with people my age, and they kind of just look at me like, okay. And
Right.
they go back and they do whatever they're doing. But
Wow. Okay. And well, actually, I was going to say that sort of takes me to my next question, which is, I know that we've potentially veered off the UFO paranormal topic, but I would make a polite argument to those watching or listening that the analyzing the societal and cultural and psychological inhibitions of groups speaks to all of it full circle. Like it's all interconnected.
well, I do want to admit that even though for many this may be the case, for some, you know, I do see students with open minds, but
Mm,
they're just kind of shy to admit it that they're interested in these topics because even though this is becoming a little more mainstream, it's just not there yet. So
right.
these kinds of, you know, these other students in university or even high school or even, you know, a little bit past college, they kind of research it on their own time, or if they see a 10-minute video on YouTube or on TikTok, they're going to click and watch and be
Mm.
interested in it. But they're just kind of shy to admit that they enjoy it.
Right. Now, speaking of which, this sort of speaks to, I guess, a much larger point on like the macro scale of education, maybe in the West or generally. But do you, I've been told on my end, personally, in all of this, that it truly depends on which courses you take, where, and all of this. But do you find that certain courses within the university systems are more open to thought and exploration compared to other courses? And I
Oh,
ask
I
this
mean, of
in a good
course.
faith way.
No,
Mhm.
of course. Here's an example. Okay, when you take a philosophy class, which I've taken, yeah, you have to be a lot more open minded. You have to really think outside of the box. But let's say you're taking a math class, right? Let's say calculus. It has to be very rigid. You really can't think outside of the box because you need to answer the question with the formula that they gave you.
Right.
But if you look at that in a more broad spectrum, let's say your different kind of elective courses, that's when you're kind of treading in a different water of what they want to teach and
Mhm.
how they're going to teach it. Do they want it to be open-minded, or they want
Got
it to
you.
be, is it A or B or C? Those are your three options. You do not get another option. When I was taking a philosophy class, it was philosophy 101. So it was like very basic. And what really blew my mind about that class in particular, and a few others that I can get into, was in one of my assignments, actually two of my assignments, they brought the topic of aliens, literal, like literal entities not from this earth. How would you react? And or if you were to be placed on a different planet,
Right.
how would the environment change? How would you change mentally, physically, things of that nature?
Right.
And that led me to two possible conclusions on having those kinds of assignments. Either one, because I'm more involved in this topic, that it eats my day every single day, that I'm beginning to see patterns that have always been there.
Right.
Or the other possibility is that universities are being more open minded to the possibilities, and it's that kind of small drip disclosure. If the younger generations are more exposed to this, if something were to happen in the near future, they would be prepared.
Got you.
So
Okay.
it can go either way, or there could be another explanation of it means absolutely nothing. It's just one course that you're taking. Well, I took another course. I took a geology course as well, and we had practically the same instance where we were talking about a type of alien material and a type of like alien rock, one that's not from this earth. How would be able to identify it? Where did it come from? And how was it created? If that makes sense. So
Yes.
it seems that from different classes that I've taken that really have nothing in common, you're seeing this connection of the UFO phenomenon in one aspect or another. Again, is it just merely a coincidence, or are they just trying to prime people for the future?
Right. And I truly, Christine, I want to thank you so much for that response because that actually adds perfectly to what I was going to ask next, which was seeing and knowing what you now know, given starting the show and looking into the phenomenon, whether it's the paranormal or the nuts and bolts side or what have you. Do you find that these school courses, whether it's philosophy, whether it's regardless of what it is, and I want to preface this as well by saying I'm certain, just like any other student, you don't sit in all of the courses that are there at the school, obviously. Do you find the courses being limiting in scope? And when I what I mean by that is, um do you find the courses, whether it's philosophy or otherwise, do you find the courses say, for example, okay, to the students, here's the question, here are a handful of answers, or is it, here is the question, go nuts with your own exploration? Because I maybe I'm very wrong here, but I feel as though depending on the subject, depending on the class, there's a limit in scope potentially due to, dare I maybe say, suppression of knowledge, because it may be that in our faces, so to speak.
It's not just university, it's all schools across the United States. If you think back to your high school experience or even middle school, whenever you took an exam, it was A, B, C, or D. Very rarely was it write an essay on what you think of this question. And if
Right.
it was probably one question of every exam that you took, and it was worth maybe, let's say, 20 points out of 100. So you only have one try versus all of your answers being write whatever you want. Now, my mother is from Venezuela, from the capital. And when she had moved to the United States back in 98, when she was learning to speak English and to take school courses here in the United States, she was so shocked. And she said, in my country, we don't have A, B, C, or D. It's what's the answer? and you don't get any help. And when I look at that, it makes you question, are we really learning, or are we just kind of being
Ah,
fed in one direction? And also with the school system around the United States, because I'm not too familiar with it in other countries.
yeah.
What we're aware of, and it's publicly been admitted for maybe the last, I think, 10 years, maybe a little bit longer, it's no one's left behind. You cannot fail a student. And if you fail
Yes, yeah.
them, they take a summer course and they'll still graduate on time.
If I could say very quickly as well, being in Canada, it's the exact same here. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
So the question that you ask, it's
It,
I want to say that when we're looking at school systems, again, college, middle school, or high school, it doesn't matter. Here in the United States and even Canada, they're giving you information that they need to give you. But they'll never teach you how to file your taxes. I'm
right.
so disappointed in that.
This is what I'm saying, right? This is what I was gonna actually bring up, that term street knowledge, if you will. There's a lot of people say that, again, depending on one's upbringing, again, there are some people, you look at them, they've never been to university and they're not successful at all. Others never went to university and they were, and then same thing for those that went to university and vice versa. So um again, just asking your opinion, do you think um those A, B, C, D options, and I thank you so much for bringing that example up of your mother, because I think that's a perfect example. I myself wonder, is that a system of assistance or a system of limitation?
I guess it
That's
just depends on who you ask.
right.
I think if I was 12 years old answering that question, I'll be like, obviously they're here to help me because I don't really care about school. I just want to pass. Okay?
Right, right.
But if I'm looking at it now with the mentality that I have, all the research that I've done with different topics, it makes me think, is it really just a limitation? It's it just
Mm.
depends, I think, on the maturity of the person's mentality on it and on what they want to achieve in life. Do they just want to pass or do they want to learn?
That okay. You know what? With that being said, I think that is a fantastic way to end this and wrap this up. But before we do, could you very kindly let my side of the audience know where and how you can be found, and your Patreon, your Twitter, all of that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a blast.
Well, thank
I
you. It's been a absolute blast on my end. I'm truly so appreciative and grateful.
No, thank you. Thank you. I do have a link called a beacons page that has all of my social media on there, um, including all the podcasts as well. But on Twitter, you can find me at eyes underscore on the skies. Same on TikTok as well. I just made a TikTok talking about these types of topics. And then you can also find me on YouTube at Christina Gomez as well. And also, my website is paradigmshifts.blog, where I post absolutely all of the shows, all the social media, and all of the updates as well. So, the best place to catch all of this is my Beacons page. Um, that way
Awesome.
you can just find everything in one place.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Well, Christina, thank you so very kindly for coming on. And I think I speak on behalf of my audience as well, that it truly has been a great conversation. And I say this because very seldom do I get a chance to speak with people of my own age or generation, so to speak. And again, I think we need a lot more people of our age engaged in this topic. So truly, I can't thank you enough. And thank you so much, everyone, for those that will be watching or listening down the road. Thank you all.